All right, ready to dive into a topic that might not seem like the most exhilarating at first glance, budgeting.
Oh, okay.
But trust me, stick with us on this deep dive. We're going to uncover how budgeting could be a seriously powerful instrument for planning, control, even motivation, believe it or not.
Interesting.
Our guide for this journey is the 4th edition of Budgeting for Better Performance from the Institute of Leadership and Management.
Okay, sounds good.
Now, what we often forget is that budgeting is more than just crunching numbers.
Right.
It's about thinking strategically, looking ahead, anticipating those hurdles,
Yeah.
and ultimately making those informed decisions
Absolutely.
that propel us toward success.
Yeah, and that applies whether we're talking about a multinational company or just our own personal finances.
So it's like creating a roadmap
Exactly.
to reach our goals. And just like a good roadmap, it helps us to anticipate potential detours, make sure we have enough resources to actually reach our destination.
I like that analogy.
One of the first things our guidebook points out is that budgeting isn't just for businesses.
That's right.
Consider governments. They have to budget as well.
Well, for sure.
Every year, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer presents a budget to the Parliament, outlining how the government plans to allocate resources for all sorts of things.
I see. So it's like
Like a giant national checkbook,
right.
figuring out how much to spend on healthcare, education, defense, all those critical areas.
It's fascinating to see how those same principles apply on a large scale like that.
And just as a poorly planned personal budget can lead to, well, let's be honest, financial strain, a poorly managed government budget can have some pretty significant consequences for an entire country.
Absolutely. It really highlights how crucial budgeting is in ensuring stability and progress.
All right, so let's break down the fundamentals here.
Okay.
How does our guidebook define a budget?
It gives a very concise yet comprehensive definition. A budget is a quantitative plan of action formulated in advance for a specific period.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Quantitative, meaning we're talking about concrete figures here.
Yes, exactly.
Not just some vague aspirations.
On a wish list.
Right.
It's a detailed plan, expressed in measurable terms, which allows us to track progress and make adjustments along the way.
And formulated in advance, meaning it's a forward-looking tool, not a historical record.
Correct. It forces us to think ahead, anticipate potential roadblocks, and then make strategic choices about how we'll allocate resources to achieve the outcomes that we want.
And finally, it's linked to a specific period, whether that's a month, a year, the duration of a project. This provides a framework for accountability and evaluation.
And no. This is where our guidebook brings up a really interesting concept, the key budget factor.
Oh, intriguing.
It's the linchpin. That influences all the other budgets.
Okay, tell me more about this pivotal budget.
For established businesses, the key budget factor is often the sales budget.
Makes sense.
It's like a domino effect. Projected sales increases, well, those necessitate budgeting for more production, more materials, more staff to meet that demand.
That makes sense. But what about fledgling businesses, the ones just starting out? What's their key budget factor?
For them, the cash budget takes center stage.
Okay.
It's all about survival at that point, making sure that there's enough cash flow to cover those expenses and maintain operations.
Now, our guidebook also provides some, well, cautionary tales about what happens when budgets aren't managed effectively.
Yes, it does.
Real-world examples that really emphasize the importance of meticulous planning and vigilant monitoring. One example is a hospital that was unable to train nurses on new equipment
Oh, wow.
because of a depleted training budget.
That's a critical oversight
It is.
with potentially huge consequences.
And then there's another example of a sales team missing a crucial opportunity because their entertainment budget was insufficient,
Yeah.
ultimately losing a major deal.
It's interesting how those examples show that. While budgets do provide structure and control, they shouldn't be so rigid that they hinder adaptability and responsiveness.
That's about striking a balance, right?
Exactly.
Having that solid framework for control, but also the flexibility to adjust when circumstances demand it.
Which leads us to another crucial aspect, budgetary control.
Okay.
It's not a set it and forget it kind of approach. It requires ongoing monitoring of actual results against the budget and taking corrective action when necessary.
It's like regularly consulting your map to make sure you're on course. And if you veered off track, well,
Take those adjustments.
a core element of budgetary control is Understanding variances,
Okay.
the discrepancies between projected and actual figures.
So let's say you allocated $100 for office supplies, and you ended up spending $120, that
Okay.
$20 difference. That's a variance.
But it's not enough to just identify the variance.
Yeah.
You need to dig into the why.
You get to the root of it.
Exactly. Was the price of supplies higher than you anticipated? Did somebody accidentally order extra materials? Grasping that root cause really empowers us to make more informed decisions moving forward. So budgetary control. It sounds like it involves this constant process of analysis and adjustment.
It really does. It's about understanding which costs are controllable, which ones are not, so managers can focus their efforts effectively.
Okay, so we've established that budgets need to be flexible, adaptable. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. Explore how the guidebook expands our understanding of budgeting beyond just purely financial metrics, introducing the concept of non-financial budgets.
Oh, budgets without numbers.
Right.
Tell me more.
What does that entail?
Well, it involves extending budgetary principles to resources that aren't directly measured in dollars and cents.
Interesting.
Think about a hospital, allocating beds to different medical specialties.
So they're essentially budgeting space and personnel,
Exactly.
ensuring the right resources are in the right place.
They might determine how many beds to assign to cardiology, oncology, general surgery, based on projected patient needs, and staffing availability.
Like a giant puzzle, making sure all the pieces fit together for smooth and efficient operations.
Precisely. And those allocation decisions have a ripple effect on other aspects of the hospital's operations, from staffing levels to procurement of medical supplies.
This concept of non-financial budgets really broadens the scope of budgeting.
It
It
does.
shows how these principles can apply to all sorts of resources, not just money.
Absolutely. It underscores the adaptability and versatility of budgeting as a tool for planning and control in all sorts of contexts.
Now, let's circle back to financial budgets for a moment and explore a specific technique mentioned in the guidebook, standard costing.
Standard costing, a powerful tool. That takes budgetary control to a very granular level.
I like it.
It involves predetermining costs under specific conditions, essentially establishing benchmarks for what things should cost.
So instead of just looking at the overall cost of producing a product,
Right.
standard costing breaks it down into the costs of each individual component and process.
Exactly. Let's say you're manufacturing bicycles. Standard costing would help you determine the expected cost of each frame, each tire, each gear, even the labor required for assembly.
It's like having a recipe for costs,
I like that.
specifying precisely how much each ingredient should contribute to that final dish.
And by comparing actual costs to those predetermined standards, you can identify any variances and pinpoint areas for improvement.
So if the actual cost of, let's say, bicycle frames is consistently higher than the standard cost, you know there's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Precisely. Maybe there are inefficiencies in the manufacturing process. Maybe the price of raw materials has increased unexpectedly. Standard costing helps you zero in on those discrepancies.
Now let's take this analysis one step further and explore those different types of variance analysis,
Right.
particularly for labor and materials.
This is where we can really get some insightful information. By examining labor variances, we can uncover potential issues with productivity, efficiency, even wage rates.
So if workers are consistently taking longer than expected to complete a task,
Right.
that's a signal that something might be amiss.
Right. Could point to inadequate training, outdated equipment, maybe even a need to streamline the workflow.
And on the materials side, variance analysis can reveal potential problems with procurement, inventory management, even the quality of materials being used.
Imagine a bakery discovering that their actual flour costs are consistently exceeding their standard costs. Time to investigate. See if they're getting the best prices from suppliers, or if there's excessive waste in the baking process.
So variance analysis, it helps us peel back the layers,
Yes.
identify those root causes of cost discrepancies,
Yeah.
which is crucial for making informed decisions and improving overall performance.
Absolutely.
Feels like we've gone pretty deep into the mechanics of analyzing these variances.
We have.
But before we get totally lost in the numbers,
Right.
let's step back for a second and reflect on those broader implications of budgeting.
I think that's a good idea.
A crucial point our guidebook stresses is that budgets, they shouldn't be viewed as these rigid constraints, but more as dynamic instruments that can actually evolve with shifting circumstances.
They need to be able to breathe a bit.
So instead of being straitjacketed by this fixed plan,
Right.
We should be approaching budgets with a certain level of adaptability,
Mm-hmm.
ready to adjust course as needed.
Like a ship navigating through changing waters.
Exactly.
Think about a company that spent all this time crafting a budget based on certain sales projections, and then suddenly a competitor launches a totally groundbreaking product
Hmm.
that completely disrupts the market.
Wow, their plans would need a major overhaul.
Absolutely. They might need to reallocate resources, modify production targets, even revamp their entire marketing approach.
That's when the flexibility of a well-structured budget really becomes apparent.
Yeah.
Allows for adaptation without completely derailing those objectives.
Now, let's broaden our perspective a bit further.
Right.
Our guidebook introduces this really intriguing concept of a non-financial budget.
Budgets without numbers.
Right.
Color me intrigued. What does that even mean?
It involves extending budgetary principles to resources that, well, can't be quantified in monetary terms.
Interesting.
Like, consider a hospital allocating beds to different medical specialties.
So they're basically budgeting space and personnel then, making sure there are enough resources in the right areas.
Correct. Decisions regarding how many beds to assign to cardiology, to oncology, to general surgery are made based on projected patient needs and available staff.
It's fascinating how those allocation choices have a ripple effect on so many other aspects of the hospital's operation.
Oh, for sure.
Staffing levels, procurement of medical supplies, the whole thing.
Exactly. It emphasizes the interconnected nature of resource allocation, especially within a complex organization like a hospital.
Now let's bring our focus back to financial budgets for a bit
Okay.
and examine that specific technique mentioned in our guidebook, standard costing.
Ah, standard costing, a very detailed approach to budgetary control.
I like detail.
It involves predetermining those costs under specific conditions, essentially establishing benchmarks for, well, for what those expenditures should be.
So rather than just looking at the total cost of producing something, standard costing breaks down the costs of every single component and process involved.
Precisely. Let's say you're a bicycle manufacturer. Standard costing would help you figure out that anticipated cost of each frame, each tire, each gear, even the labor required for assembly.
It's like having a cost recipe, outlining exactly how much each ingredient should contribute to that final product.
I like that. By comparing actual costs to those predetermined standards, you can identify any variances and figure out where you can make some improvements.
For instance, if the actual cost of bicycle frames is always higher than that standard cost,
Right.
well, that tells you there's a problem, and you need to address it.
Exactly. Maybe there are inefficiencies in the manufacturing process, or the price of raw materials has gone up unexpectedly. Standard costing can really help you focus on those discrepancies.
And understanding those discrepancies
Mm.
can help us make more informed decisions and improve the efficiency of our operations overall.
Now, let's delve even deeper.
Okay.
Explore the various types of variance analysis,
Right.
particularly those related to labor and materials.
I'm ready. This is where we can really gain some valuable insight.
Analyzing labor variances can shed some light on potential problems with productivity, efficiency, or even wage rates.
So if workers are consistently taking longer than expected to complete a task, that might be a red flag.
It is. Could suggest a need for additional training, equipment upgrades, or maybe even a need to streamline that workflow.
And for materials, variance analysis could uncover issues with procurement, inventory management, maybe even the quality of the materials used.
Imagine a bakery, and they're noticing their flour costs are always exceeding the standard.
What's going on there?
Well, that would prompt an investigation. See if they're getting the best prices from their suppliers, or if maybe there's just too much waste happening during the baking process.
Variance analysis helps us really get to the bottom of things.
It does.
Find those root causes of cost discrepancies, which is so important for making those good decisions and ultimately improving performance.
It equips us with the information we need to make those informed decisions, optimize our processes, and ultimately boost that performance.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have
Explored the fundamentals of budgeting, the importance of flexibility and control, and the ins and outs of variance analysis.
And we even went beyond those traditional financial budgets to see the power of non-financial budgets, recognizing that budgetary principles apply to more than just those purely financial metrics.
Before we wrap up this deep dive,
Right.
I think it'd be helpful to really distill those key takeaways
Summarize what we've learned.
from our exploration of budgeting for better performance.
I agree. That's a great idea.
All right, let's try and synthesize all these valuable insights we've gained from this exploration of Budgeting for better performance. Uh, where should we even begin?
I think the most important thing we've learned is that budgeting is so much more than just playing with numbers in a spreadsheet.
It's a dynamic process, one that forces us to really think strategically, anticipate potential roadblocks,
Hmm.
and make informed choices about how we use our resources.
And we also learned that budgeting principles apply to so much more than just businesses.
Exactly. Governments, nonprofit organizations, individuals, they can all benefit from implementing these practices to reach their goals.
And we talked about the key budget factor, the budget that kind of sets the stage for everything else.
Right. For established businesses, it often revolves around that sales budget, while new ventures really need to prioritize that cash budget just to ensure their survival.
We dug deep into the concept of budgetary control, emphasizing that continuous monitoring of actual results against the budget.
And using those variances to identify areas for improvement is essential.
We even went beyond traditional financial budgets, discovering the power of those non-financial budgets to manage resources like time, space, personnel.
And we looked at standard costing as a way to establish detailed benchmarks for costs and identify where those actual costs differ from the standards.
But I think the biggest takeaway is that budgeting is not a one-time event.
It's an ongoing journey of planning, monitoring, adapting, refining,
To achieve that optimal performance,
like a compass,
guiding us toward our goals.
helping us navigate that constantly changing landscape of business and life. Now, before we wrap up, I think a nice, concise summary of the key points would be helpful
Definitely.
all for our listeners.
All right, let's condense it into 10 essential takeaways.
Okay, I like.
First, budgeting is strategic. It's about planning, anticipating, and making those informed decisions.
Number 2.
Beyond businesses, budgeting principles apply to everyone, governments, organizations, and individuals alike.
3.
The key budget factor. Identify what's driving your budget, whether it's sales, cash flow, or something else entirely.
4.
Budgetary control. Continuously monitor your progress, analyze those variances, and make adjustments when you need to. Flexibility is key. Be willing to adapt your budget to changing circumstances. It's a living document.
6.
Non-financial budgets. Apply those budgeting principles to time, space, even human resources.
7.
Standard costing. Establish those benchmarks to keep track of your costs and identify areas where you can improve. Variance analysis. Uncover the root causes of those cost discrepancies, and then take action to correct them.
Right.
Continuous process. Budgeting requires ongoing attention, refinement, and adaptation.
Oh.
An empowering tool. Budgeting puts you in control, helps you make informed decisions, and ultimately achieve your goals.
That's a fantastic summary. Really captures the essence of what we talked about today. Reinforces the idea that budgeting isn't about restricting ourselves. It's about empowerment, making those smart choices.
And on that note, I'd like to leave our listeners with a little something to think about. Now that we've seen the value of budgeting, what's one area in your own life or work where you could apply these principles to get better results?
Maybe it's finally creating that personal budget to conquer that debt or save up for that dream vacation.
Or perhaps it's implementing a more structured budgeting process at work to improve project planning or resource allocation.
Whatever it may be, we hope you'll embrace the power of budgeting as that tool for success. Remember, it's not about limitations. It's about taking control and achieving your aspirations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of budgeting. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving for better performance.